Okay, good evening, everybody, and a very warm welcome to this Salvation Song Zoom meeting. It's absolutely great to see you this evening and that you're able to join with us in such a way at such a time as this. And we are absolutely thrilled that we have a panel of special guests who have a tremendous wealth of experience within this particular field. And when we think about singing and we think about vocal leadership within the Salvation Army, we have people who are staff section leaders, territorial leaders, we have core singing company leaders, core songster leaders, those who have been responsible for divisional youth choruses, and at various music schools in the UK, USA, Canada, and further afield as well. So let me just introduce our panel to you just now. Many will already be well known, but in alphabetical order, we have Major Len Ballantine, leader of the Canadian Staff Songsters, and also a previous leader of the International Staff Songsters. Len will be very well known to us also as a songwriter and a composer within the Army. And Len is talking to us from Canada, so welcome, Len. We're also pleased to have with us Howard Elliott. Howard is the songster leader of the Bromley Temple Corps down in London. And again, thank you, Howard, for being here and welcome this evening. Singing company leader Stephanie Lamplough of the Birmingham Citadel Corps, but also is the Assistant Territorial Director for Music and Creative Arts here in the UK and Ireland Territory with a responsibility for creative arts. Welcome, Steph. Thank you for being with us tonight. Dorothy Nancekievill, International Staff Songster Leader. And correct me if I'm wrong, Dorothy, but the longest serving International Staff Songster Leader. We're absolutely delighted to have you. And of course, you were at Millfield just a few months ago, so well known to us all. Neil Smith, the Territorial Music Secretary for the USA Western Territory, also the Staff Bandmaster of the USA Western Territory Staff Band, and the founding leader of the USA Western Territory Staff Songsters. Again, Neil, thank you for being with us tonight. We very much appreciate your time talking to us from Los Angeles. And last but certainly by no means least is songster leader Julie Wheeler of the Portsmouth Citadel Corps. And Julie was for many years also the leader of the Southern Youth Chorus and has had a very prominent presence at a number of Salvation Army summer schools over the years as well. So welcome, Julie.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for your time and in anticipation for your contributions. And we trust that at a time where we're unable to meet for rehearsals and for worship and for concerts, that this gathering will bring some enjoyment and some blessing at this time as we hear from the wealth of experience of our special guests. So without any further ado, let's begin. And so this first question is for Howard and for Julie. What does it mean to you to lead singing as part of worship?
Do you want to go first, Julie?
Thank you, Howard. Okay, lovely to be on here, by the way. It's a bit like being in a zoo when you flick along all the pages and you just see people staring at you, isn't it? So I'm going to stick on the first page and just see a few people. I find leading singing an absolute worship. An absolute privilege. Apologies. I always have done. I was first introduced to choral conducting at the age of 17 when I was both pretty incompetent and terrified. But somebody kind of put their trust in me. I think what I didn't have in competence or confidence at that time, I kind of made up for in a real knowledge of the power that music could make in worship. And that carried me through right from that very early age. I'd always witnessed that in a corps that had been very musically steeped in tradition over the years. And I suppose I had that opportunity and I really felt that power from a very early age. And so I guess from that early age, I had a real sense of responsibility because with privilege comes responsibility. And so I never get up to conduct, ever. I've never done to this day without feeling quite nervous. Because I really feel the weight of responsibility on my shoulders. Sometimes you have 3 or 4 minutes in a meeting where you feel that could be a real breaking point for people, but the power of the Spirit to break through. And I've always carried that with me in anything I've done, whether it's been in a really small setting or in a big setting. And I guess That's really important. I'm never going to be the most gifted musician, but I've always carried with me a need to kind of try and communicate the gospel in the best way I can. And so I think that's really important. I once read a sentence said, to be a radical worshipper, you have to be sold out for the kingdom of God and not your own agenda and motives. And that's just as well, really, because my agenda was never going to be great. But I believe I gave that to God in the early days. And I really believe he's blessed me and used me.
Thanks, Julie. Howard, what are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I can echo a lot of what Julie's just said, especially the idea that as soon as you stand, or the moments before you stand, are always a little bit nerve-wracking. Less so now. I was first Songster leader way back in the 80s for a period, and I had a break for 11 years and then have recently, in the last 5 years, become Songster leader again. Latterly, I found it easier, but there's an element of just anticipation and wondering whether you're quite right and whether you're ready. At Bromley, we have, maybe similar to yourselves, the songsters provide pre-meeting Sunday morning worship, a song just before the meeting, set the scene, and then quite often we're placed in the meeting programme just before the sermon. And it's a bit of a responsibility, as Julie said, because you're there to set the scene. I'm going to a clanging big name drop here, but a previous CEO of ours, Major Sean Helen Clifton at Bromley, said to me in no uncertain terms the way Shaw does, your job is to set the scene just before I preach. And he was very clear in as much as a well-constructed, well-chosen, well-delivered songster song puts people in the right frame of mind to listen to the word of God. And I've thought about that ever since. And I've thought that that's our main job. When we come to a Sunday morning meeting, our job is to set the scene for worship with a pre-meeting song. And then just before the sermon, ordinarily, we have to make the congregation ready to hear the word of God. And that's something I've always lived by. Latterly, in the last few years, these nerves, what I've done is I've been more prepared. So I've tried now to have 3 or 4 songs that I'm leading up to, bubbling under in the weeks or so before performance, ready to go. So I've got an option of 3 or 4 songs, but I'm always leaving myself open to perhaps just a day or 2 before a Sunday to change my mind, feel led to just something sounds good or something sounds right. I don't set things in stone, because quite often you could say it's a gut feeling, but you think this one sounds good, this one will work for Sunday. And it is amazing to me how often what you might think of as a gut feeling really works. So I've tried to be open, to be led, to not stick to my rigid template, and to just to go with the feeling. And as I say, it's amazing how many times that's come up trumps.
Great, thanks for your thoughts, Howard and Julie, on that one. We really do appreciate that to get us started. We're going to move across now to Dorothy and to Steph. And the question I have for you, Dorothy and Steph, is this one. And we say that you have both attended music college and have worked professionally and educationally with singers at a high level. Speaking generally within the Salvation Army, from a technical standpoint, having heard a number of groups around the UK and beyond, what is one thing that is strong about Salvation Army singing and one thing that we could look to improve on?
Is it me? Sorry. Well, it's a real privilege actually to hear lots of different groups around the Army world. And one of the things that being involved with the staff section enables you to do is to travel and to hear amazing groups. You know, I remember being in Kenya, and the singing that we heard there was absolutely fantastic. Being in America, you know, all different sorts of sounds everywhere you go, but you know, it's great to hear so many things. So if I try to kind of encapsulate what I think is really good, I think actually most Army choirs are really flexible, and it's partly because we have all different sorts of music written for us, and so therefore you try your hand at different things, and I think it's good to be able to do that. And I also think that when we sing in an Army group, we mean what we sing. So actually, there's real sincerity about the music making and a desire to communicate, because actually I think music's all about communication. We were very privileged as staff songsters to once get involved in a performance of the Messiah with the Welsh Symphonia. And the conductor, Mark Eager, wanted to put on a performance of the Messiah with people who believed it. And so actually, if you believe what you're singing, I think that makes, I think, you know, we do that really, really well. And, you know, I think there's great technical ability and that great ability to communicate. If you wanted my views of what things we should all consider and all think about all the time, and that is the sort of sound we make, so that it's, you know, it's a sound that's appropriate for what we're singing. And also, I think, thinking about melodic line. You know, when we speak or when we say anything, we naturally shape it. But I think it's really important from a technical point of view that you actually think of, you know, the rise and fall in the meaning of the words and in the musical line, and so how you cadence at the end. And I think if you get those sorts of details right, it means that then the words are more important. You know, any kind of technical inaccuracy or whatever kind of doesn't get in the way. And I think actually, you know, it's about also everybody always doing their very best. And actually, I can enjoy any group if they're actually really prepared and they're doing their very best.
Great, thanks, Dorothy. Steph, what are your thoughts?
I was going to say one of the same things as Dorothy is that Salvation Army groups seem to be able to really respond to the words of a song in a very unique way. So many times I've stood in front of a secular group and you can't get anything out of their faces. They just look like that. No matter what you say to them, no matter how much energy you try and give them, they just look blankly at you, and they don't feel as though they can communicate those words. But with the Salvation Army group, I think because the words mean such a lot to them, it's almost as though they're telling their testimony, their faith journey when they're singing. And it also gives the leader a unique opportunity to be able to share how they connect to the words. And I think a group really responds to that. If you tell them what these words mean to you and how they've affected your everyday life, it gets the group to think about that. And you can see that on their faces the next time they sing that song, that they're really leaning on certain words or really thinking about particular lines that have spoken to them. It could be that it's spoken to them throughout the entire week. Sometimes you can't get a line out of your head with a Salvation Army song, and it speaks to you in such a way, and God speaks to you in such a way, and that has to be unique. You know, it's a God-given thing. And I think also, maybe I would say, and this isn't just in groups, this is in Salvation Army singing, is the ability to harmonise. Now, I've been blown away with this because I was not brought up in the Salvation Army. I went to Mass, Catholic Mass every week, where there's not a great deal of singing and there's absolutely no clapping whatsoever. But to suddenly stand in a congregation singing the tune and everybody around you goes into harmony, it completely blew my mind the first time I heard it. And, you know, just that kind of thing of people growing up in families where they all sing together and they all just harmonise without even knowing about it, or they can sight read it because they used to play in their instrument. And it's just a wonderful experience that you get as a child and growing up that then we see in our groups that other groups don't have. And I just think that's a real gift that we've been given. It is harder to talk about what I think we should do differently. And I think one of the things is, as leaders, maybe to be open to different ways of doing things, or maybe to think that maybe the way we've done it for years is not necessarily the best way or the most relevant way to do it now. There are plenty of resources, which I'm happy to talk about later, but there's plenty of things to look at to either improve our technique if we think that's what we need to improve on, or there's plenty of things that we can do to make rehearsals more exciting, or the ways that we perform, or the ways that we learn a song, just different from the way that we just do every single week. And I think sometimes in the Salvation Army, leaders, we can all be a little bit guilty of regurgitating almost a similar practice every single week. So that's what I would like to see, using those resources that are there.
Great, thanks Steph for your thoughts on that one. So I'm now going to move to Neil and to Len. And just to kind of set the scene for this question, the formation of the International Staff Songsters 40 years ago really advanced vocal ministry within the Salvation Army. The ISS have been a model standard. They've introduced new repertoire, new concepts, and are still doing this very effectively today. You have both established staff songsters in your own respective territories, having founded the USA Western Territorial Staff Songsters and more recently the Canadian Staff Songsters. So there's three parts to this question for Neil and Len. So Neil, first and foremost, what was the motivation for forming the staff songsters in your territory? Len, how did you go about forming the staff songsters? And then for you both, what has the impact been for singing in your territory through the formation of these two fine singing groups?
Well, it's good to be with you today. For us, I think I happened to be in the right place at the right time. Back in 2005, so the songsters are coming up to 13 years, I think, next year. 2005, I happened to be in a meeting which the territorial commander also came to. And you know, when you go to a meeting, you don't want to end up sitting next to the boss. Well, the only chair left when he came in was right next to me. And he put his hand on my arm and said, you need to talk to me after this is over. And when I interviewed, so it was close to the time I interviewed for my current job. And I was told in no uncertain terms by many people that the formation of any territorial music group was just off the radar. There was no discussion to be had. And, you know, my predecessors, both Jim Anderson and Ivor had tried, and no one was listening. So I kind of landed on my feet because Commissioner Swires, who's the most terrific guy, some of you might know him, said, I want you to do this. And I said to him, well, okay, but you do know it's not supposed to happen. And he just said, well, it's going to be different. So we kind of formed that group. I think his interest was maybe not necessarily to be like everybody else, because we're fairly different here in the West Coast of the United States in many ways. But I think he wanted, I think he realized that we had enough ability and enough interest and enough wherewithal to actually assemble a group like that and to model good choral practice. And that group has done that, I think. So I think that was his motivation, to be able to share the love of Jesus through our music territory we came into contact with. And, you know, the territory is vast. It covers half the United States almost. And there's a lot of commitment and effort required, but that's kind of where we came from.
Thanks, Neil, for your thoughts on that one. If we can come back to you after we've heard from Len as to how you went about forming the Canadian Staff Songsters. So, Len, how did you go about forming that group?
I wonder if everybody's picking up on the tremendous weight and burden of starting something. And Neil referred to the immovable nature of tradition and how difficult it was to get that staff section going on the West Coast. I think of Norman Bearcroft and the tremendous weight of starting staff band in Canada, and then to go home and start the staff songsters in Britain. It takes a man like that, someone who is a political animal, and someone who has a lot of drive and a lot of connection. Now that it is my turn to speak, my dogs are speaking as well. Murphy, go home. This is the Canadian Staff Songsters were in existence in the early 1900s, and they were made of, it was an all-female group, as was tradition at the time. They existed for a few years, and then with the beginning of the First World War, they abandoned their singing work and took up other things that were important to the war effort. The Canadian Staff Songsters had 3 tries at getting going in present age. Brian Burdett looked at it when he was a music secretary. I looked at it when I was a music secretary, and just like Neil said, there did not appear to be the will at the grassroots level to make it happen. There was still people folding their arms and hanging on to what they felt they had, and an unwillingness to allow something they perceived as perhaps would take some of the shine off what they were doing locally. And then another commissioner, American Commissioner Bill Francis, asked me to start it. I was a Corps officer at the time, and I knew what kind of time, effort it would take to do it, and I said no. But in retirement, we were able to look at it again. And there was a very recently in 2015, there was a rebooting of our music department in Canada from the grassroots up, and Craig Lewis was hired, Lehman was hired, and he looked at the territory with a holistic view. And for a year, he worked behind the scenes, a whole year, to get the infrastructure going, the finance picture going, the budget, the rules and regs, all of that detail work. Then it was announced at a Congress in June of 2016. We auditioned in September. We sang publicly at the Christmas event, which is a territorial event in Toronto. And so there was a lot of thinking, a lot of moving of great obstacles. And then in the end, about a year of hard work with the infrastructure. And all I had to do was show up and make music.
Wow, thanks for sharing that with us, Len. So if we can start with you and then move on to Neil, what has the impact been on singing in your territory through the establishment of the staff songsters, the USA Western Territory, Canadian staff songsters? What's the impact been?
It's the entire country of Canada plus Bermuda. And we have just begun, after 4 years, to be able to move out from our province, something that we can drive to easily. It takes so much money to fly anywhere. So in terms of physical impact and presence, and that's being limited. That's why recordings are so important. We wanted to do a recording. We got one out. The group is training up leaders. There are people within our group that have accepted leadership since coming into the staff songsters. And this was part of the dream, that they would pay it forward. They would get inspired. They would see how wonderful singing is, and the community that singing can bring. And it doesn't always rest on the skill of the singers. It rests on the whole. You can't run a band without a solo cornet section that can play, but you can sing with anybody and it'll be what it is. And I think that's really important. Wherever we go with the staff songsters, we include the local singers, the population, whether they're songsters or people from other groups that they have, or the community. They assemble a group to sing with us. We have a workshop in the afternoon. There's teaching done. We prepare a couple of songs and we include them either in the Saturday festival or the Sunday worship. And that's a very tactile thing. That really is making a difference, because people are, once you participate in something, your eyes are opened. You want to do it again. You want to go forward. So I think that's a real tangible thing that is happening. The leadership is another, and recordings is another. I think it's working for us.
Great, thanks for your thoughts on that, Len. So Neil, what's the impact been out in the West?
I'm muted. Oh, there. I'm unmuted now. That's good. It's fairly similar, to be honest. We have a vast territory, and we don't do, with the staff band and the staff songsters, we don't do monthly anything. So ours is 3 times a year. One of those 3 would be our commissioning weekend. So it's hard to get out and to share effectively, but we tend to, when we go anywhere, do workshops with the local songsters, with the local singing company. Within both of our groups, the staff band and the songsters, we have people who can handle all kinds of things, praise and worship and drama and all kinds of creativity. So we tend to put on music days and things when we go out and try and encourage people that way. We've got the absolute benefit in this territory of many, many years of good singing. And sometimes people, when they come to things like WMI, it's like, oh, that's actually quite good. But we've had the benefit of Ivor and Jeanette Bozanko for many years, and Jeanette was always and still is an advocate of great singing, and we still reap the benefits of that. So the idea that we can share a great ministry and encourage people, that's really what we're about. We have folks in the groups who are now, as Len said, leaders who might not have stepped up, but they feel that the expectation is kind of there. If we're paying for their ticket to trip around, then they can be useful in return. So that's kind of, it's been effective.
Great, thanks, Neil. And of course, I've been across to WMI, and I know how strong the music programs are there. And so thank you for your thoughts on that one. So we're going to now move to Dorothy and to Len on a completely different topic altogether. And I'm going to ask Len first, and then Dorothy, what makes a good rehearsal?
In a word, contrast. In terms of musical styles, up, down, middle of the road, you've got to have different kinds of music. And because of our ministry, we use it all. We don't just prepare a soft song for Sunday morning. Contrast, known versus unknown material. Pace, we want contrast in terms of intensity and times of relaxed. In tone, we want contrast between humor and seriousness. So when I approach a rehearsal, I'm thinking about keeping things always changing, always changing. I try not to let people go to sleep ever.
Thanks, Len. Dorothy, what's your thoughts on this one?
Well, funny thing is, the first thing I put here is pace and contrast. But I thought I might just mention a few of the non-musical things about a rehearsal, you know, in terms of, you have a great rehearsal if everybody's there. So attendance is really important, get an awful lot more work done. Things to do with how it's all set up. You know, if people come in and you think it's all ready and you know, they've got all the music and all that sort of stuff, it just sets a good feeling. And also to have, if you're there on time and you've maybe got a break in the middle, to allow that sort of fellowship to be going on, because I think for staff sections in particular, you're coming from all over the place, you're charging in and then you're charging off in different directions. But in terms of the actual practice, I couldn't agree with Len more. It's our responsibility to try and create the environment where people will try lots of different things, to give them the confidence to do that. And you do that, it's a bit like being a school teacher as well, isn't it, Andrew? You know,
yes,
you're trying
absolutely.
to change the activity, keep people interested. If you go down one line and it's not quite, you know, you're kind of sensing it, because goodness me, I think we all know when you're standing in front of a group whether it's going down well or not. And sometimes you have to respond to that, and sometimes you have to be tenacious to actually, you know, if you want to stick at something. So if I've got time at WMI or music school, I normally do quite a lot of warm-ups to start with, but with a staff section, certainly we don't have a lot of time to do all the things we do. So rather than using warm-ups, what I tend to do is to try and choose songs that will warm us up, because then you kind of have two things, you're kind of being time efficient. And I think being time efficient is another important thing, to get the kind of balance between speaking and explaining, but also singing, because people have come to sing. I think also, you know, Len was right, it's about trying to encourage people to do different styles, because you learn different things from doing different sorts of pieces. And also, you know, making sure that whatever you do, there are times where everybody's really, really concentrating, but then there's also times for a bit of humour. You know, at the end of the day, all the people we're working with are doing it out of the kindness of the heart, and actually you want them to have a good time as well. So, you know, it's, as I say, we all know standing in front whether the rehearsal is going well or not, but there are things that you can do to change the pace. I think also what is great about doing, you know, an army section is there is a sensitivity to people's situations as well. And sometimes rehearsals can become something quite emotional and something quite meaningful in a supportive way, but they can also be celebratory when things are going on. So it's a real privilege to do that. And I suppose the last thing I would say is also trying to be respectful towards people. I like a bit of a laugh, but I would never try to humiliate anybody. Well, not anybody yet, who knows? But it's a privilege to do it. And it's back to kind of making sure you've got enough material, and the material is relevant to both and allow us a section to do well, but also to push the boundaries a bit.
Thanks, Dorothy and Len, for your thoughts on that one. Rehearsals and rehearsal preparation is so important, and of course at such a time as this we can't actually meet for rehearsals, and so thank you for those tips, which I know a few of us will be able to take on board and implement for ourselves. We're now going to move to Steph and then to Howard, and this question is essentially about role models, and I'm pretty confident because of who you all are on the panel, because of what you do, and because of what you do so well, you will be role models. So the question I have for Steph and then Howard, who are your role models? What qualities do they have which you strive to emulate in your own leadership?
Okay, this one goes way, way back to my childhood. When I was at school, I was obviously all about music. I used to play the bassoon, which is an instrument that's really in demand, so it means that you're in absolutely every ensemble, and obviously I was in every choir going, so every break time, every lunch time, every night after school I'd be in the music department. And part of that was to do with my passion and love for music, but another part of that was because my music teacher was somebody who for me was completely different than any other teacher that I ever come across. And there was something about him that I wanted to spend more time in his rehearsals. When he stood in front of us, I knew that I was getting something very special. For me, he embodied Romans 12, you know, the verse when it talks about doing your everyday things for God, whether that's your sleeping, you're working, you're getting up, and making sure that God is at the center of all of those things. That is what he embodied. Now, I was brought up in a Catholic school, but it just so happened that my music teacher was a Salvationist. And I didn't know then, but I know now that there's absolutely no coincidence that my music teacher was a Salvationist, and that his son would come to that school to do music, and that I'd end up marrying Gavin and becoming a Salvationist and be here today. That's not a coincidence. And it's no coincidence that Graham was given to me as my role model. He inspired me, not just in what he managed to do musically, but he inspired me in everything that he was and everything that he did. You know, he's not with us now, but that doesn't mean that every day I don't think about the influence that he had on my musical leadership, my life as a whole, me as a Christian, and my journey to this point. Every day I think about that influence that he has, and it's wonderful how I see every day in my life in Gavin those same qualities. And it's strange to have your husband as a role model almost, but you know, he tries to make me the best person that I can be musically. He's always saying, you know, have you thought about doing this? Why don't you think about doing that? And it's almost like he's carried on where his dad left me. Every week, not at the moment, but normally I stand in front of a fantastic group of young people. And it's a real privilege to be a singing company leader, because you get these youngsters at that tender age for many, many reasons. They're at the beginning of their journey of faith. They're like sponges. They listen to you and they take on board everything. On a technical point of view, you're helping to shape their voices. They've got such a young instrument, and the things that you teach them on how to stand, how to breathe, how to use their mouth, they will carry with them throughout their lives. And I just hope that when I stand in front of them in that weekly environment, that they get something from me of that essence, that although I'm trying to teach them those technical things, everything that I do is embodied in Jesus, and that they see that he's in my sleeping, he sees that he's in my working, they see that he's in how I stand in front of them and how I talk to them about my journey and the songs that we sing together. And if I can influence any of them in a tiny bit of the way that Graham influenced me, then I would be extremely happy.
Thanks so much for sharing that with us, Steph. Really appreciate it. So Howard, role models, what are your thoughts?
Firstly, Steph, that's quite a movie script you've got there. Somebody needs to make that film. Role models. Firstly, I need to go back to my mum and dad, back at Liverpool Walton, where I was born and grew up. My mum and dad were really into army music and were great influences in the early days. Also, back in those times, my first bandmaster was a gentleman that some will know called Brian Twist. Brian's no longer with us, but many will know him. And the thing about Brian was that he was an enthusiast. He was willing to try all sorts of things as bandmaster and later as a songster leader. And it's only in recent years, really, that I've really appreciated how much I learned from Brian and his work. The thing about Brian was that he had this ability to make the group he was leading perform way above the sum of their parts. He just had something about him that you really wanted to perform, sing, play for, and that's something that I strive for. I just want to tell you one short story. You don't have to go very far in the army world to hear a Les Condon story. Now, I don't think I ever spoke to Les Condon, but I came across Les Condon in the early 1980s. He came to Cobham, and I was actually playing B-flat bass in one of the bands for some reason. I'm not sure why I was playing B-flat bass, but I was. And it was a really hot afternoon, sat at the back of the band. Les Condon came in for 15 minutes to take part of band practice, and he dished out some manuscript, and we played through a hymn tune arrangement that was due for publication. And I was sat at the back with a great big window behind me, I remember. It was a boiling hot day. The window was slightly open, there was a nice breeze coming through, and the band started to play. And I had about 12, 15 bars rest. And I remember sitting there thinking, isn't this nice? Les Condon's conducting. I'm playing in a band with Les Condon. It's beautiful music. And then being suddenly aware of the fact that I'd lost count. I didn't know where I was in the music. And started to inwardly panic. And as I was working out what my options were, I thought, well, either I just guess, have a go for it, or I sort of wait for the car crash to happen and then the band will collapse. And just as I was pondering this, Les looked at me and I looked at him, and our eyes locked, and he just very quietly mouthed the words B section. So I knew where I was, and I carried on counting. I was back in the game at that point. I made my entry very quietly, and as I played, he looked at me again and he winked at me as he carried on conducting. Now, I don't think anyone else in the band realized this was happening, but at that moment I had to run through a wall for Les Condon, because afterwards, as I thought about it, he could have stopped the band, or he could have allowed me to ruin things. He could have stopped the band and used me as an example of someone who wasn't concentrating, blah, blah. But he chose the kindly option, and he thought, there's someone who doesn't know where they are, I'll help him out. And as I say, I don't think anybody else was aware of that. And in recent years, I've looked back on that, and I've thought to myself, well, there was a man who had a choice to make, and he could have used me as an example, but he decided to take the kindly option. And I think, as somebody said, I think Dorothy said earlier, you've got to be nice to people. You've got to treat people well. And as I say, I'd have run through a wall for Les Condon that day, because he chose the kindly option, and I didn't mess things up. I came in, I enjoyed the rest of the piece, and Les went on his way. And sadly, I think that might have been the year that he passed away. But as I say, I never spoke to him, but I look back on Les Condon's influence as somebody who, if there's a nice way of doing things, choose the nice way, and don't try and be clever with people.
Great, thanks Howard for your thoughts on that. Really do appreciate that. So we're going to change topic again completely, and we will now move to Julie, and we're going to move to Neil, and we're going to talk about recordings. And the question is, why is recording ministry so important in the Salvation Army? How do you go about preparing a group for a recording, and what guides your repertoire choices? So Julie and then Neil. Thank you.
I think if any time has highlighted the importance of recordings in the Salvation Army life, it's now. I don't know how many of you are involved in the same way as I am in putting together online worship during these times when we can't actually get together physically. But I, every week, get together with a team and we work with the officers to formulate what we hope is a really meaningful worship service for people who will just be sat in their homes. And I'm obviously, the whole thing of making virtual groups at the moment is kind of in vogue, but very, very difficult to do. And so we haven't ventured into trying to do anything like that. But in front of me, I have a rich array of Salvation Army recordings, which I can call upon. Now, it doesn't mean I can just use everything, because obviously there's copyright issues for streaming and so on. But the fact that I've got these now shows me just how important it is to me in this point of my life and to our congregations at large, because I know it's being used throughout the world really at this point in time. And so I know in recent weeks I've used recordings from, I think, every group here represented, and people have been very blessed with that. And so, you know, I'm grateful for those things that are there just literally at our disposal. And what's lovely is I can pick a Songster piece I want for Sunday and something extraordinarily hard, and we just sing it. Because we haven't had to rehearse it, but because it's there and we just pick things that mould in with the message. And it's just been amazing to be able to do that in recent times. When I was growing up as a young songster, I was very heavily involved in the songsters at Portsmouth, obviously, and just as an accompanist at that time. And our leader then at the time, John Bird, was prolific in recording. I think we did them every 2 years, and that was quite an experience to be part of. But I'd never realised the amount of time and effort and detail that has to go into something like that until I embarked upon something myself. But I think those recordings themselves at that time was just so important and continue to be important to people, providing that sort of solace at home that they can have, like things like Holy Ground. I think those sort of recordings were great. When I eventually got into doing my own CDs with the Southern Youth Chorus, I think they were kind of in many ways a groundbreaking period of time for what we were producing. People today will even say to me, that's still my favourite CD, that CD. And I just think what an honour to have been associated with those projects. I think because at that time we brought in different styles and genres, and if I'm totally honest, I can't take responsibility, I can't take the accolades for those. I was part of a team, and I had a very good driven team, a particular guy called Alvin Allison, actually, who was worthy of mention, who was superb and continues to be superb in producing things which were different, and he had a real drive, has a real drive and passion for doing that. And so whilst I was leading chorally, I suppose, I wasn't the main driver in that. But I did realise in working on those situations how really, really difficult it is putting a recording together. And I think in the 90s, when we recorded those 2 recordings, which Hallowed Be Your Name and With One Voice, we were the first people to probably delve into the whole thing of kind of new creative recording, apart from the pop world, where we pre-recorded all our backings first of all, and then we had a whole vast youth chorus singing just to obviously headphones. And that was difficult. I found that really difficult, because for me that took away all the kind of ability to be kind of creative and flexible on the day. You know, you were absolutely rigidly tied to what you were doing, and so we had to have weeks and weeks of rehearsing just with those, and it took me on a whole different journey at that point in time. And so obviously, but my choice of repertoire with that group was completely different to what I might have recorded with the Songsters, which I then have done subsequently, because of just the kind of people you've got, the kind of tools you've got available to you. And having said that, I haven't done a recording since I first started the Songsters, probably 5 years in. I did one, and in the last 10 years haven't, because I do realise it's such a huge amount of work. And for every group, it has a season. And we had our season, then I think we've moved on to other things now, but I still love to hear other people being creative and coming out with the kind of things they are now, which is still speaking so well and powerfully.
And as I mentioned to you on the phone last week, Julie, With One Voice is certainly one of my favourite CDs which have been produced, and certainly gave me a few ideas for when we did the CD with Millfield last year. Another one of my favourites is Love's Call, which Neil produced with the USA Western Territory Staff Songsters. So Neil, what are your thoughts on this particular question?
Well, I wouldn't be the role model to follow for sure. In some cases, I'd love to listen to a recording, so I'm grateful to people who produce those. And as Julie said, it's time consuming, it's labor intensive, and sometimes at the end of the day, you're maybe not sure that it's going to have the desired effect and reach the people you want it to reach. And nowadays, you know, I have 2 teenage boys, and I don't think either of them would really be looking to purchase a CD. But, you know, the whole recording CD thing is probably well done with, and we might be the last group of people who are still plugging away at that. But I download everything. I'm an Apple Music fan and just keep listening to whatever's out there. But I
Neil, we've lost your audio. You've all of a sudden gone quiet. Just trying to.
Is that better?
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Oh, that's good. So I think people who would purchase a CD, if you go to a concert and bring your wares, I think the folks who would do that still have access to that. There's a bunch of stuff you can listen and download online, but it's great to be able to just to see, for me, on a research purpose too, what everybody else is up to, because we're stuck on the left coast of the US here, and people kind of forget we're here, and it's hard to it's sometimes hard to get stuff. You mentioned the Love's Call CD. That was the last one I made with the Songsters, and they've made another one since, which is excellent. And our youth chorus, which Matt Woods leads, has done a fantastic CD too. I love that, and that has been very, very effective. And in sharing that, it's best to be as prepared as possible for me and everybody else. When we recorded Love's Call, we were headed to the UK for our trip, and because we only meet 3 times a year here, the songsters take a huge responsibility on themselves because they have to learn that material. So we got together a few months before we left to come over there, and the rest of the time I had to send them stuff and say, this is what we're doing, learn it. And I, instead of them coming to me, I went to them regionally to undertake some rehearsals. So we didn't have everybody all together until we probably landed at Heathrow. So it's hard, but the responsibility, even if you meet on a weekly basis, it's still up to the folks in the group to be prepared and learn, so that you can guide them through that. Some of the songs that we were singing weren't even written the last time we actually all got together. I remember Kevin Larson sent me this half version of Boundless. He said, this will have to do right now. And then the end is finished, but there's no piano. So we were just you just cobble it together and make the best of what you can in the circumstances. I think repertoire choices for me, I'm particularly fussy about what we sing. We have to be able to communicate the gospel through that music. And if there's stuff that gets in the way, then that's pointless. So we, at least here for us, we generally try and make sure that we can communicate well with people in that arena. You know, we could do fancy probably, but we just don't. We want to be able to make sure that people understand what we're trying to tell them.
Thanks, Neil. And you have said that nowadays that, you know, CDs are almost phasing out at the moment, and download's a big thing. And that's going to be interesting to see how that develops over the next little while. You know, think about Apple Music. We also think about SPS Tunes, which is the download site which SPNS run. And one of those on there is the Now Is the Time CD by some of the Millfield songsters. So, shameless plug there. Shameless plug, featuring Charlie Green and Abigail Johnson in addition to the group. And so that's available on there to download if you would like to have a little look and experiment with the SPS Tunes download system. So sticking with recordings, and we're going to move to Dorothy, and we're going to move to Len, and we're going to think specifically about the international staff songsters now. So the ISFs have a vast recording ministry. They've recorded many CDs over the years. But is there anything that you would like to have done differently? And is there a song which you haven't yet had the opportunity to record but would like to at some point with your respective groups?
Well, just before I start, I'm feeling really ancient because the first time I was involved in a recording was with Bristol Easton as their pianist in 1986, and that was a record. So I'm feeling really ancient that we're kind of dumping CDs. And I have to say, I still quite like to have a little booklet with a CD. But you're absolutely right, everything's going on download. And just to, sorry to go back, but just I do think recordings are really important. And I think for all of us, we've also some stories of people saying how either uplifting or supportive they are. And it was something I didn't realize until I got involved in it. Both Julie and Neil have talked about the time it takes to kind of decide what to do and how to organize it. And when you sort of pose that question, it's quite difficult to decide if I would have done anything differently. The thing I often agonize over is the order of the pieces that you have on the CD. Len and I both spoke earlier about pace, and that's, I think, something to do with a recording as well. You've got to kind of keep a bit of interest, you know, where do you put the stuff that people know to kind of tie them in? But then how do you introduce them to something new? How do you keep them interested if it's all slow or if you get too many, you know? So I think in terms of that, I sometimes question, there was one Christmas CD that I did that I'm still not sure I got the right piece at the beginning of the recording. I wasn't unhappy with the piece, but you know, that side of it's really important as well. And in terms of something that I would like to record, it's a song that we have already sung. When we were blessed to go to Australia 3 years ago, we decided, well, I decided actually, that it'd be good to take something that was very British. And when we were on that tour, we sang the vocal version of Nimrod, the Lux Eterna. And I'll let anything that's to do with light and whatever. But it's quite tricky, and we sang it really well on the tour. And we just haven't had time to go back to it because then other projects came in the way. And so that would be a piece of music. And then back to kind of, you know, so something I would have done differently. One of the recordings that we were been involved in recently was actually called A Gowan's Legacy. We've actually got 2 CDs. So I wish I'd bought the second CD because I'm not quite sure. I don't think people have noticed the second one. But I actually wish I had done that much earlier, because John Gowans' words are just amazing. And it was a worship situation for us actually recording that. I think we all know recordings can be quite tense. There's a time limit. You're trying to deal with headphones or not headphones, and you don't know where people, you know, you're kind of people got caught on the way there in the traffic. But actually it was an act of worship to do that CD. And so if you haven't bought A Gowans Legacy 1 and 2, I'm sure you would enjoy it.
Thanks, Dorothy. Len, what are your thoughts on this one?
Yes, I confined my thoughts just to a particular tune out of all that were recorded in the 7 CDs that we did during my time. More Than Wonderful is just the greatest song. And I think it's desperately hard to do a recording that captures the visceral quality, the power of it, the emotion of it, the spectacle of it. It's being in the room and seeing people reaching for everything they've got to make this song work. A recording cannot do that. And I was so disappointed. I mean, we named that album More Than Wonderful because that was the hot tune on that one. But I wish there was a way of capturing in a recording. I'm not sure that it's possible with that song. I think it has to be a video, and I think it has to be a live video, not something that is going to be contrived in any sense. So that was my first thought. Lots of other little things about the technical aspects that I would change. I'll never, ever do one with headphones, ever. We tried that, or we tried studio work, but the best place we ever recorded was Air Lyndhurst in London, which is an old Methodist church, I think it was. And because of that, it had the acoustic of a church. It had the feel of a church. You were in a church, in a sanctuary. And that was fabulous. What song am I waiting to record? No idea. The recording.
You haven't written it yet, have you, Len?
No, well, the repertory comes from, the recording comes from your repertory, and your repertory comes from your needs. And if you're programming for Saturday festivals and Sundays, then that, you know, yeah, I have no idea. I know what I'm going to do on our next recording because we were supposed to do it the beginning of May, and that's all in the works. But that comes from current repertory. How many years it'll take us to get back to that standard, I don't know. We'll have to see. I hope everybody's singing in their closets at home.
Great, thank you, Len. Appreciate your thoughts on that one, and we do look forward to seeing the second CD of the Canadian Staff Songsters in due course. And so back to Howard. It's always good to share positive experiences, and one of the reasons why we've put this meeting together tonight is so that we can really pool resources and really benefit from the wealth of experience of the various members of the panel, as it were. So with that in mind, could you share with us something which has really worked with the Bromley Temple Songsters? It doesn't necessarily have to be something musical, but something which you felt has been really worthwhile and has really worked with the group. Thanks, Howard.
Yeah, in terms of what's worked, perhaps I'm not the person to ask. Maybe Dorothy might tell you more about what's worked and what's not worked. I did, yeah, thinking about this one, we do try different things in Songster practice. We do a fair bit of singing. We take that as our priority, but I like to introduce other things. I once made the mistake of saying to one of the ladies in the Songsters, what is your favourite Songster song? And I was a bit taken aback with her answer. She said, I don't actually like singing very much, which, as I say, it's taken aback. I thought, this is Songster practice we're talking about. But it did make me realise that in a choir brigade, people don't just come for the singing. There are all sorts of reasons why people come on a Thursday night. And not everybody's into the music, which, as I say, as a leader, isn't the most encouraging thing to hear. But I am aware of the fact that we all come from different places. We have different jobs, we have different situations, we have different home life. And people arrive on a Thursday evening with all sorts of cares and what have you. And so maybe 2 hours of solid singing isn't always what people want to do, even if you vary it and you do soft songs, lively songs and what have you. So we every now and then we'll finish singing about 9:45 and do a mini quiz. So we'll do a session of Would I Lie to You, which seemed to go down well. We've even been out to the bowling alley one Thursday night, and cake is always good. I think every songster practice can benefit from a bit of cake every now and then. But yeah, dressing up, Christmas jumpers, etc. So we try to introduce things that just a little bit out of the ordinary, and as I say, concentrate on the music, but every now and then just throw something else in. I do like to every now and then throw in a secular song. I think Len mentioned earlier about singing something just out of our comfort zone. A couple of years ago, we had to do a prom style evening, and I thought that would be an occasion to try something different. We sang Seal Lullaby, and I'd say the choice of that song split the Songster Brigade down the middle. We'd obviously never use it on a Sunday morning, but it worked well for that evening. And some people still say to me, can't we sing it again? Well, as I say, not on a Sunday morning we can't, but actually there are occasions when I think it's right and it's a good idea to slot something in like that.
Absolutely, and you've hit the nail on the head in terms of singing in the Salvation Army is far more than just music and singing. You know, it's about community, it's about engagement, it's about worship, it's about communication. It's so much, I mean, so much to so many different people. And it's great that we're able to share some of those experiences. I know that at Millfield, every now and again, we go to Costa Coffee, and that always goes down quite well. And so there's lots of different things which we can do to make our groups worthwhile being a part of and to have that variety as we join together in these very unique communities. So on to Julie, just on a similar theme, but we're going to be thinking about ministry with young people and engaging young people in church and in faith is very important. And our singing groups have, over the years, been a catalyst to bringing people to faith and to bringing people to deepening their faith. And so through your extensive work with the Southern Youth Chorus and at various music schools, could you share with us some of the highlights of working with young people in these singing groups?
Yeah, I absolutely love working with young people. I've got school choirs, and I was a singing company leader first of all for a long time, and I love trying out new things with them because at the end of the day, they didn't have any inhibitions. They were happy to try all sorts of my crazy and sort of creative ideas. I think when I was at music school years ago, and Howard's already referred to days of Cobham Hall, and they were fantastic days, and I was very privileged to be under the influence of some very significant leaders, both musically and spiritually, and they had a massive influence on my life. I think because at that time I realised what a huge impact certain people could have on you. It made me realise that actually I needed to in turn impart that to others, and if I felt I could work well with young people and associate them, then that was probably the area I should work with. And so obviously from a young age of working with the singing company and so on, I picked that up, and actually, funny enough, one of the biggest influences on my life at that time, who made me want to work with young people, was actually probably one of the oldest people I've ever worked with, which was Muriel Yendall, who many of you will know. But Muriel gave me the very first opportunity to conduct at a music school, and to that I'll be ever indebted. And she never let me forget, actually, that she was the first person who ever let me conduct, and that's fine, because I owe her a lot for that. And actually the other person who gave me huge influence was actually Len here. So thank you, Len. You know that you've had an inspirational impact on me. But when I was the singing company leader, for example, I had kids in that choir, the same as you do in any kids' choirs, who couldn't really sing. But I was so intent, I wanted them to be engaged in the fellowship of our church, that I would just give them things to do. So there was one little boy who couldn't ever sing in tune at all. So I just said to him, why don't you rap that? And so we had rapping verses of the song, and that same little young boy ended up rapping on the hall of the Queen Elizabeth Hall in London at the Hendon Highlights with the Southern Youth Chorus. And he was just the boy from round the back whose mum was the cleaner. And I just thought, actually, the self-esteem and the look of pride actually that still comes from him, and I ask him about it, is something that is precious. I think, and I've always thought how important it is to build relationships with people, whatever you're doing. And half the battle is building the relationships, and then you can take it from there. And when I took over the youth chorus, there were 25 people, and I nearly didn't take it. I was offered a job in London at the time, but I felt a real calling upon my life to work with that group. And I don't know why. I turned down a good job, and I thought I'm not going to get back on a Monday to work with them if I take this job. And that was the deciding factor for me. I already felt that God had said to me, this is what you need to do. And we went from a 25-membered group, and I took it on, to a 90-member group at one stage in the heyday of things. And I have to say, it's because I felt that calling upon my life. It was about building the relationships. I felt it was so important to engage some of those young people who were really kind of drifting on the periphery of core, that were quite traditional and didn't really feel necessarily a place for them. And so they came, they weren't fantastic singers, some of them, but they were under the influence of people who could sing and nurture them. They were in a place where they sang beautiful songs and they shared the gospel in that way. And for me, that was the most exciting, amazing thing that could have happened in those years of my leadership of 14 years. And I used to pick them up. I used to drive miles to pick these kids up and take them just to make sure they got there, because I felt that God was really calling me to do that. And so not everybody has that same interest or ministry. They find, young people quirky and peculiar. And, I just have people ring up, say, I can't come to the Albert Hall today because I've had a very bad haircut and I just can't come out. And I think, what? And that's just young people for you. It's just completely unpredictable. But for me, we might have had huge amounts of people. We're taking 2 coach loads of people to every time we did an event. It was quite cumbersome. But for me to see those young people engaging so energetically, enthusiastically, brought out in me an amazing sense of energy that I didn't believe I had in me. And, I can't begin to describe, I think, how bringing on that self-esteem in some of those young people was just the main thing. We sang at the Albert Hall, we sang at Wembley, we went to Holland, we got standing ovations. It was amazing. I can't ever be more grateful for that. But for me, seeing those young people being so proud and singing their hearts out was just the most incredible thing. So you asked me about highlights, and I would say, yes, we sang at the Albert Hall, we sang at Wembley. I can imagine and remember vividly, as if it was yesterday, the way I felt leading those people, seeing that sea of faces in front of me. But actually, on the other hand, some of the highest highlights I had were like after having someone spoken in an evening meeting on one of our weekends away, as we sang Lift Up the Cross. So many of the young people were just going forward and drifting away from singing, to the extent I thought it was just going to be me and the piano at one stage, and that feeling you get of what do we do now. But you know, I didn't worry, because for me the important thing is those people were in that influence, and that has never left me. And to even today, I work with young people in our corps, and I love them. I think, you know, we've got to find a way to engage our young people, and we're still doing that through music schools. I did about 40 music schools where I worked with the girls groups and the mixed groups, and I loved it. And, you know, we must be so careful to make sure we find relevant and meaningful ways to still engage our young people. So for me, the highlights weren't necessarily 2 great CDs working with those youngsters. They were the fact that today they'll email me, they'll text me, they'll WhatsApp me and say, do you know, those were the days that were pivotal in my spiritual journey. And for me, that's better than any great standing ovation. And, you know, I just hope people continue to have that buzz and be able to work with our youngsters like that.
Absolutely, and engaging young people is just so important, and it's been a real blessing, particularly in our own core setting at Millfield, for me as the Songster leader, to have had a good influx of young people coming through the last couple of years, making that commitment, and just seeing them grow and deepen their faith through the singing group, as well as obviously other aspects of core life as well. So Steph and Neil, so starting with Steph, sometimes in the army, our music leaders play it safe, and that's you know, they stick to what they know, and that's an observation, not a criticism. From a territorial perspective, how can we upskill our vocal leaders and ensure that songsters and singing companies and other singing groups at a local level are developing their ministry and trying new things? What advice could you give? And are there any resources out there which you could point us to?
Yeah, there's definitely resources out there. The Territorial team have worked really hard in the last couple of years. The Music and Creative Arts Regional Specialists have been putting together a resource that is aimed just at music leaders. The guide A to the Join the Crescendo is a general guide, but as well as that, they also have specific guide Bs that we've put together. Myself, Ira Thomas and Stephen Byrne have written a guide B, which is a guide specifically for vocal leaders. It's found in the resource tile on the Music and Creative Arts website. You can just go to it, download it, and it has that whole journey about being a vocal leader. We've tried to do it from the standpoint that anybody can dip in and out of it, no matter what age or experience you are, that hopefully those youngsters who are trying to do the singing company for the very first time may feel as though they've got somebody by the side of them to help them through it, that they can look at how to do your very first practice, what the ways of best practice are, the different ideas of technique, of repertoire, of conducting skills. All of these things are found in that. We spent a long, long time devising that piece of work, that body of work, which is there to help all kinds of vocal leaders, from community choirs, singing companies, songsters, SSA, youth choruses, and hopefully there's something in there that people can dip out and take out. And I would encourage people to do that, to go on the website and have a look at that, because I think that people, whatever experience you've got, you can always either reaffirm what you're doing, which is always great as a leader to see, oh yes, I do that, I'm glad I'm still doing something right, or maybe to get new ideas, because as we said before, I think doing new, fresh ideas is something that's very, very important. Julie's already touched on it, and it's making things vibrant and things that are relevant. And moving on to another resource, I think that Music Editorial did a fantastic job of redoing Sing to the Lord Junior Voices. I don't know if people have seen it in the last year. You still get the books and the CD, but you can go online, and attached to all the songs are a Bible thought and presentation around the songs, so that you can share that with your group and you can kind of get to know the song really, really well, and it helps you with that leadership. But also, I've selected 3 or 4 of the tracks and put very simple choreography to those on a video. So as a singing company leader, you can watch that and you can say, oh, that inspires me to do, I wouldn't do that, I do it my own way, but actually I'd quite like to put this move to that, or I might let the children make up a move, or, oh, I couldn't see our kids doing that, they didn't go in the wrong time or the wrong speed. But it might actually bring something new, or it may be, yes, we're going to do it like Steph and we're going to have a go. But hopefully there are resources that people can just use to inspire them to to develop the way that they would do something and try something a little bit fresher maybe, or different, that may work, may not work. But it's all about taking that leap of faith and thinking outside the box. For me, that's really important, is to get outside that box and think, what is God asking me to do that's different? And I think those two resources help point towards that.
Absolutely, and there really are some great resources being produced by THQ, and thanks so much to you and the team for what you're doing. It's great to see how we can advance and share ideas in such a way. So Neil, what's your thoughts on this topic? Thank you.
We've heard a lot already about being relevant and engaging people. It's a fear of mine that the age bracket, between like 18 and 30 is kind of disappearing from our facilities, and we work really hard to do that, to keep them. One of the things I think we probably don't do very well is the development of those folks in a leadership role. So they don't know what to do when the time comes. And we're working here in North America on an online leadership training academy. It's kind of got the brakes on right now because we're all sequestered in our own areas and not able to keep that moving forward. But we tend to, I'm choosing my words carefully, we tend to not worry about helping to develop some of our young leaders who are going to take over from us until it's really urgent, until we're done. And it's too late by then, because some of them have then given up because we've not invested any time and effort in them. There's been no opportunity for them to come alongside a current leader and learn. A great idea would be a mentorship program where we encourage folks. For us, maybe what we need to do is develop a mentorship leadership thing between the staff songsters and the Territorial Youth Chorus, and kind of stick those folks together and do that kind of encouragement. We probably shouldn't be too frightened about trying anything that works to keep developing the ministry that we have. Here, even we have 9 divisions within this huge territory, and every single one of them is different. And I think we also need to not be worried about having what everybody else has, but we just need to roll our sleeves up and work with what we've got, and encourage who is there. Not wish that we had other people, because we're not going to get those. And if we have a plan in place, we shouldn't be frightened to be bold and step out and try and push the envelope a little. We do like to play it safe. You're right, just because that's the way we do things, and it's in our comfort zone. But Stephanie said we should, push that out, look outside the box, and I'm probably as guilty as anybody else. But if we give our younger folks a chance to come alongside us and develop their skills, and not wait until it's too late, until they find something else they can do, which doesn't involve us or our church or our music forces, then we could serve ourselves better, I think. If you're looking for a good resource, as far as available here, Harold Birdmar, my colleague in the Central Territory, has produced, last year I think it came out, a book called Music as a Core Ministry, and there's great chunks in there on the leadership and doing things. If you really want one, I could probably send you one. I only have like 4,500 of them left to distribute, so don't tell Harold. But if anybody needs that, I would be happy to share one of those with you.
Thanks, Neil. And as Steph has just quite rightly indicated, it is a pretty hefty book, isn't it? And lots of resources and ideas. That'll keep you busy for a while. But it's good to share ideas, to share resources. And of course, leadership development is so important. And interesting to note that within the UK territory, that there are quite a number of younger core leaders songster leaders, sing company leaders, deputy songster leaders, deputy sing company leaders, people involved in youth choruses, particularly, you know, under that age of 40 bracket. And that's really encouraging to see, isn't it? A lot of younger people, myself being one of them, part of that group, leading groups and taking things forward. And so something completely now different again. We're going to just lighten the mood ever so slightly. And this is a quick fire question. Okay, quick fire question. We're going to go around the group and we're going to do it in alphabetical order. And what we're going to do is we're going to ask you to name your favorite Salvation Army vocal piece. This can be something which is published, something which is unpublished. And I realize there will be many on your minds that will be favorites. But if you had to pick one which was your favorite, I don't need a big explanation as to why. Just the title will do. What is your favorite? Len Ballantine.
I'm grateful to go first. I don't have to think of another one while somebody else is taking it. Christ's Part, James Curnow.
Steph. Oh, sorry, Howard.
Grant us thy peace.
Steph.
Majesty and Glory.
Dorothy.
I'm going to do 2, Choral Symphony number 4 and Jesus Himself Drew Near.
Neil.
Mine would have to be If Then by Len Ballantine.
And Julie.
I have seen The Glory of the Lord by Chris Brindley.
Great, thanks for your thoughts on that one. Really interesting. And as we've just said, we will have many favourites, but good to hear your thoughts and to share that with us this evening. So we do have a question now which is open to all of our panel members. And it'd be good to hear from a few of you on this particular question. Are there any new ministries developing for singing in the Salvation Army? And how can we use our singing in a more missional way?
I've just got a very quick thought on that. I alluded before to the fact that I think being more missional is actually rooted in building relationships. And actually music obviously is generally non-confrontational. It's a leveller, it can accommodate all abilities. And so in the last year, we've started at Portsmouth a community choir. I know that's not new, groundbreaking thing. There'll be community choirs represented in lots of places here. But for us, it's been wonderful because it's been another stepping stone to bring people along the road to build a relationship, which brings them into our hall. It brings people from our community in all different ways, from different parts of our social projects to people who work in our haven. And it brings them together, but they also mix with people from the Salvation Army who are regular worshippers, who then have an influence of getting alongside them. We have a Facebook page, and that's really grown. That group's grown. It's doubled in size, and just before the lockdown, we were really growing and going places, and wonderful community. And having that opportunity to bring new people into your building in a non-threatening way is, I would say, such a good way. And we've gone another step even further, and I know this is a fairly moot point for some people, but I'm going to say it because we've done it. We've got open sections at Portsmouth too, and for a very traditional corps that now stands at probably about number 6 in the world in age, we've done that, and we've done it really successfully. So we've had steps right through from open rehearsals to having a community choir, to having people coming to now be part of our open sections. And if I may just say, for those who are concerned, it's worked extremely, extremely well. And it's just opened up another step for people to be coming into our community and feeling welcomed and part of it. So I'm happy to talk to anyone anytime if they want to talk about that.
I think lockdown has kind of forced us to do all sorts of things online. And it was one of the things I wanted to kind of bring us into the 21st century a few years ago. We have a team that kind of help us do that, and it just means the reach is much bigger and it's much less threatening. And a bit like Julie, you know, every opportunity we take the chance to do any kind of community singing, you know, involve people. It's a great time for singing. You know, if you turn on the TV, you know, we've got military wives choirs, we've got NHS choirs, we've got The Voice. And so I think we should capitalise as much as we can and be as welcoming as we can.
Being part of the mission service at THQ, we have the privilege of working with other groups on the mission service. And it means that you can get music into environments that maybe you wouldn't have normally done. So I'm thinking straight away of how Music and Creative Arts works with the older people's ministry, and how we have Singing by Heart. I don't know if you've heard about that, and that's in over 100 centres now up and down the territory, where singing is brought into community centres or into corps, so that people who are living with dementia can sing together with family members and with carers, And it's really an idea to empower new leaders within the community, that they can do this on a weekly basis and bring singing to people who wouldn't necessarily come through our doors on a night's practice, but that we can, in a mission way, do that. There's also things like the Musical Theatre Day, when youngsters are encouraged to come together and to invite their friends. It's a non-uniform event, and the whole day they spend singing, dancing, acting, but also they're learning about the legacy of musical theatre within the Salvation Army and the history of the Salvation Army, in a way that they probably wouldn't come up in their lives on any other setting. And I think it's a lot about getting music and getting singing out to the people who wouldn't necessarily come through our doors on any other occasion. And I think any chance that we can do that is brilliant.
Absolutely. Any more thoughts on this one?
I'd just like to say that the elderly population of our congregations may not be tech savvy enough or feel happy to try to figure out how to make their computers take the live streaming, but they're going to be gone, and there's going to be a whole lot of other older people who are very happy to figure out how to make their computers get in touch with the streaming. And I think that we're gonna see an age, and we've just been through 2 months that have been very creative for people. And I think that going into the future, we're going to see that we're going to be going into homes that we don't even know about, because our live streaming is going to become really, really important to our mission. And I think the Salvation Army has a great wealth of diverse music, brass and vocal. And it's unlike any other church organization, unlike anybody else. And I think that'll be a great tool to use in the future.
I've got one final question for the panel before we begin to wrap things up. And so I'll just give the question first and give them a little bit of time to think about that, whilst I also do an advert. So the question for the panel, and we will go in reverse alphabetical order, starting with Julie. So in closing, please could you share with us either a top tip for singing or vocal leadership in the Salvation Army, or indeed a hope or prayer for Salvation Army singing and vocal leadership moving forward. So either a top tip or a hope, a prayer for this avenue of ministry moving forward. So whilst I just give you a bit of time to think about that, I would just like to share with you an advert for next week. And if you can join us next week, we'd be absolutely thrilled to see you for this event called the Songwriters Circle #2. We have Paul Sharman, who's also an assistant territorial music director down in the UK THQ, responsible for brass and choral music. Gavin Whitehouse, the USA Eastern Territory staff songster leader. Lee Fisher, who's on the call this evening. Lee is a great songwriter and is the songster leader down at Droitwich. And we also have Major John Martin, who is retired Salvation Army officer, a previous songster leader at the Regent Hall Corps, and again, another great writer. And so if you're able to join us next week, we'd be absolutely thrilled to see you as we hear the stories behind the songs, and these 4 fine songwriters share a little bit about their songwriting journey and ministry within the Salvation Army. So the final question then, a top tip or a hope or prayer. So just for time, one or the other would be great. Starting with Julie, thank you.
Okay, so my hope and prayer just reiterates what we've just said. It's brought everything together for me, and it's made it clear in my mind that my prayer for Army vocal groups and leaders is that we remain both relevant and missional in everything that we do moving forward.
Neil?
I think mine would be similar. My hope and prayer would be that we continue through the vocal ministry that we have to reach people and share the gospel, and not try and be too clever so that it turns people off.
Dorothy?
To think of our listeners, because actually it's really, really important that we choose the right things in the right situations, depending on who we're singing to, and we actually need our listeners. And then alongside that, it's about keeping singing. You know, singing we learn great big wads of scripture. It holds us together, and actually it touches things. It touches the soul, and so it's really important that any opportunity we get, that we share our belief and we share our faith through singing.
Steph?
I'd like to leave you with a line from a song that we sing in our Songster Brigade, and that's, "The will of God won't lead you where the grace of God can't keep you." And I would just like to reiterate that if you're in that position as a leader, God wants you there, and he will guide you and keep you where he wants you to be, and to have faith in your own ability as a leader.
Howard?
Yeah, I'd say surround yourself with a good team and involve as many of your group as possible in everything you do, and don't be scared to try something new.
And Len?
Leaders, listen up. Loosen up. Leaders, loosen up is what I intended to say. Convey the song and not the beat. The singers do not need to know where the beat is, but they desperately need to know the point of the song, the emotion to be conveyed, the operative words to be hand-delivered by the singers. This is what needs to be shown to the singers. And in order to do that, leaders have to loosen up and stop being so controlling, as if that was important to conveying thought. Let's get at what is driving the spirit of the song and convey that.
And thank you to you all for your thoughts on that particular topic, in terms of leaving us with something to think about as we conclude this gathering this evening. And so I'd just like to say a very big thank you to all of our panel members. Thank you so much for your time this evening, or indeed for Len and for Neil during the day. And we are very grateful for what you do, for who you are, and for what you do so well within the Salvation Army. So thank you for your influence. Thank you for all that you have done, for what you are doing, and what you will continue to do in this avenue of ministry. For everybody who has logged onto the call tonight, thank you so much for joining with us, and we hope that you have indeed enjoyed the opportunity to hear from these very distinguished leaders and hear a little bit about their story and a bit about what really inspires them to do what they do. I was wondering, Len, if you would share a prayer with us to finish as we conclude the gathering, but I do have just 2 short verses, and I have shared these verses a few times on these calls now, so may I just leave these with you. Ephesians 2:10, God created you to do amazing things. And 1 Corinthians 15, verse 58, always do your work well for the Lord, for you know that whatever you do for him is never a waste of time or effort. So to our panel members and to everybody who was logged onto the call this evening, keep doing amazing things for the Lord with the gifts, the talents and skills that he has given you, knowing that whatever you do for him is not a waste of time or effort. Thanks, Len.
Father in heaven, we thank you for the vision that you've given us as leaders and as singers. We thank you for the wonderful opportunity of leading others in worship. We're grateful for the fellowship we have in the Salvation Army, the bond that making music brings to, and the richness that it brings to our lives. We're thankful for that. So as we go forward, Lord, from this rather difficult time, we look for new ways of being what you need us to be. And it may look a lot different than what it's ever looked before. We ask for the courage to follow those instincts. Lead us with your spirit and continue to inspire the writers and the leaders and the singers to be the people they ought to be open to your spirit. That the mission will be accomplished. That's our prayer, Lord. And our deepest thanks to Andrew for putting this together at a well-crafted hour. Thank you, Andrew. Bless you all.
And amen. Thank you, Len. Just a reminder about next week's event. It's good to see Lee and Gavin on the call this evening, and we look forward to being able to join with you next week. So stay safe and stay well, and please feel free to sign out the call when you're ready to do so. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
I'll say bye, everyone.
Here we go.
Andrew.
Hi, Peter.
Oh, Peter.
Bye.
Hi.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, hi, Rob.
All right, mate. Hi, Dorothy.
Right, thank you, Pete.
You still at home?
This is interesting.